This presentation is intended to provide information about how Charlotte is intended to grow and change over the next 20 years. We'll start with a brief overview of how Charlotte grew over time, and then focus on recent planning efforts that will guide growth in the future, including the Charlotte Future 2040 Comprehensive Plan, the Charlotte Future 2040 Policy Map, and the Charlotte Future 2040 Community Area Plans. Charlotte was established at the intersection of two indigenous trading routes at Trade and Tryon Street in the early 1700s. The settlement had a mixture of land uses, active building fronts, and a walkable gridded block of streets. This form of development is referred to as a 10-minute neighborhood because you can access most daily needs and services within a 10-minute walk. The map on the left shows the extent of the city around this time period. In the early 1900s, Charlotte experienced a significant population boom. Concurrent with this growth was the advent of the streetcar, so our community expanded outwards along new lines. Development constructed along streetcar lines still functioned as a 10-minute neighborhood because it included a mixture of housing types, a mixture of land uses along main corridors, and small walkable blocks. Again, the map at the left shows the extent of our city's jurisdiction at this time. After World War II, like many other American cities, the development pattern of Charlotte changed. Due to a growing population, federal policies, and an increase in car ownership, Charlotte's new development pattern was suburban in nature. This meant that land uses were separated, and instead of being mixed within a compact area, we saw large subdivisions of single-family homes separated from commercial corridors or centers. The street network was no longer gridded, and the blocks became larger and less walkable. Charlotte continued to grow in this fashion throughout many decades. By the mid-2000s, our community had grown significantly. Suburban growth had proven to have significant environmental impacts and was more costly to serve in terms of infrastructure. Furthermore, our community voiced a desire to return to a more walkable and integrated development pattern. In order to address the community's wishes, the Planning Department would need to update its policies and regulations. The map on the right illustrates that as of 2015, 73% of our community had guidance that was out of date and not aligned with the community's preferences. So, around this time, our department committed to updating both planning policies and development regulations. The remainder of this presentation is going to focus on the policy work that's been done since the mid-2000s. As a reminder, planning is a two-step process. The first step is to develop policy guidance which provides a vision for the future. The second step is to implement the vision through regulations or laws, such as the Zoning and Subdivision Ordinance. Today, there are three major policies that guide Charlotte's growth and development. We'll walk through the highlights of each effort, beginning with the Charlotte Future 2040 Comprehensive Plan, which was adopted in June of 2021, the Charlotte Future 2040 Policy Map, which was adopted in March of 2022, and finally the current effort underway, Community Area Planning. The Charlotte Future 2040 Comprehensive Plan began in 2018 and was a 2.5-year effort. The adopted plan provides a vision for future growth and development. It also includes 10 plan goals and modernized guidance such as the Equitable Growth Framework, a growth strategy, and a palette of place types. Charlotte's vision for growth and development is to ensure future growth benefits everyone, and Charlotte becomes a more equitable city for all. Within the plan, equity is defined as meaning all residents will have access to housing choices, employment opportunities, and essential daily goods and services, such as a grocery store. It also means not being exposed to environmental hazards. The plan was developed with input from diverse stakeholders and reflects interactions with over 500,000 residents. Once the vision was defined to become more equitable in the future, we had to develop a system for measuring existing equity or conditions as a way to monitor future efforts. The Equitable Growth Framework is a system that employs 4 metrics and 1 overlay to evaluate current equity conditions. The map shown here illustrates the vulnerability to displacement overlay, which identifies residents in most need of assistance or threatened by potential change. Shown here are the 4 metrics which define equity. 1. Access to essential amenities and goods. 2. Access to housing opportunity. 3. Access to employment opportunity. And 4. Environmental justice. I won't read each of the measures listed below the metrics, but you can see there's a lot of data baked into the system which helps us understand current levels of equity. With the vision to become more equitable in mind, staff worked with the community to develop 10 plan goals. They are to create 10-minute neighborhoods, encourage neighborhood diversity and inclusion, improve housing access for all, promote transit and trail-oriented development, provide safe and equitable mobility choices, build healthy, safe, and active communities, integrate our natural and built environments, provide diverse and resilient job opportunities, retain our identity and charm, and finally, be fiscally responsible. Concurrent with the development of the plan's goals, staff talked to the community about the city's projected growth and asked for input on which growth strategy would help create the most equitable future. Ultimately, the community desired a combination of potential growth scenarios. They chose a scenario that 1. Accommodates the majority of growth in transit corridors, 2. Develops localized and context-sensitive centers, and 3. Allows greater variety of housing choices throughout our city. The last major component of the comprehensive plan is a new land use classification system called place types. Place types are more holistic than our old system, called future land use, because they provide guidance for land uses, building form, mobility choices, and open space needs. Place types will help improve access in Charlotte and create complete communities. 10 place types were adopted within the Charlotte Future 2040 Comprehensive Plan. They're categorized into the places we live, work, and play. We don't have time to review the character of each place type shown on the screen, but they essentially provide a range of intensity within each category, from less intense to more intense development types. After the comprehensive plan was adopted, staff began work on the Charlotte Future 2040 policy map, which is the first step in implementing the plan. The citywide map is a companion to the comprehensive plan, because it's a translation of the plan's place-based policies to specific geographies. Place-based policies are those that provide direction for the type and intensity of development appropriate. This map is important because it replaced our future land use map and is used in multiple decision-making processes, such as rezonings and capital investments. The map was developed with the place type tool just described and included a 3-step process. The first step was to translate existing development on the ground into place types. This helped the community understand how place types were intended to be applied and served as a reference for future mapping steps. The second step was to translate plans adopted since 2010 into place types. Plans adopted since 2010 provided guidance for the more walkable mixed-use type of development that the community desired. However, these plans only covered approximately 27% of the community. For the remainder of the city, we translated existing entitlements or zoning into place types. Finally, the third step of the process was to update the outcome of step number 2 with policies from the comprehensive plan. We started by using the equitable growth framework to evaluate where there was low access and high environmental impacts. In these areas, we looked for opportunities to change the place type designation in order to improve access or mitigate impacts. We also prioritized the protection of established neighborhoods, open space, and manufacturing jobs, since these were some of the goals within the comprehensive plan. This slide provides more detail about the inputs used in each mapping step. I'd like to point out that we tested the mapping approach and draft outcomes against several data points to ensure the proposed designations can accommodate future growth projections, that they are aligned with our infrastructure and environmental capacity, and that they are feasible in terms of market readiness. Upon adoption in March 2022, the nearly 73% of our community with outdated policy guidance now had current and holistic guidance for appropriate land uses, building form, mobility choices, and open space needs. The policy map implements the comprehensive plan's guidance to accommodate the majority of our growth in transit corridors and centers, and helps protect the majority of our established neighborhoods and manufacturing jobs. Community area planning is the second or next step in implementing the comprehensive plan. The Charlotte Future 2040 Community Area Planning effort kicked off in January of 2023 and is currently underway. Within the comprehensive plan, there's a planning framework which outlines a hierarchy of future planning efforts needed to support the 2040 vision. The second tier, titled Strategic and Action Plans, are more detailed citywide plans, such as the Strategic Mobility Plan. The third tier, titled Community Area Plans, are intended to provide more detailed development guidance for smaller geographies throughout the city. The more detailed development guidance within these area plans will include recommendations for place type refinements, infrastructure projects, and supportive programs needed to help realize the city's vision. This effort will use larger planning geographies than in past planning efforts in order to accomplish several things. First, they'll help facilitate conversations and collaboration among neighborhoods who experience similar conditions or issues. Second, the larger geographies will allow us to address major barriers which would have typically served as a plan boundary in past efforts. And finally, these larger boundaries will help us identify citywide policy updates. We are developing 14 plans concurrently so that no one area is left waiting for this important guidance. The planning process includes 5 phases. The first 4 phases are scheduled to be completed over the next 2 years. Each phase of the process is associated with a key component or chapter of the draft plan. In Phase 1, we translated the comprehensive plan's goals to each community by identifying their needs for access to housing, jobs, goods and services, and environmental impacts. This work was completed in February of 2023 and is available in the community reports on the project website. In Phase 2, which runs throughout 2023, we will ensure future development supports the community's priorities by reviewing and refining the place type designations within the 2040 policy map. We may also identify additional land use or design guidance needed for key locations. In Phase 3, which begins and runs through 2024, we will work with interdepartmental partners, such as the Charlotte Department of Transportation and Housing and Neighborhood Services, to identify infrastructure projects and supportive programs that are necessary for realizing the community's vision. Phase 4 will begin in the middle of 2024 and will produce an implementation strategy that outlines how the plan recommendations can be put into action over the next 5, 10, or 15 years. Review and adoption of the 14 draft plans is tentatively scheduled to begin in 2025. This is an example of Phase 1 for the West Inner Geography. Using the Equitable Growth Framework measures, the greatest needs for this community is to provide better access to housing choices and reduced environmental impacts. With those needs in mind, in Phase 2, we'll review the place type designations within the 2040 policy map for the West Inner Geography. As described earlier, the place type designations currently in the map are based on guidance from the comprehensive plan and significant input from the community. They were applied citywide to ensure future growth is aligned with infrastructure capacity and distributed equitably. In this process, we'll look for opportunities to refine the place type designations in order to provide better access to housing and mitigate environmental impacts here. Next year in Phase 3, we'll return for another round of community workshops to discuss needed infrastructure projects and supportive programs for the West Inner Geography. The expected outcome of this multi-year effort will be 14 draft plans that are intended to be used in future decision-making processes such as rezonings and capital investments. Place type refinements recommended within the plans will be incorporated into the citywide map upon adoption. And any citywide updates identified in this process will be carried forward to future comprehensive plan updates. As done with the previous 2 efforts, we continue to prioritize equitable engagement in the hopes that it leads to equitable recommendations and future outcomes. We are using a variety of online, in-person, and collaborative engagement efforts. At this time, we have hosted workshops for 5 different plan geographies. Content presented during these workshops are available online and available through the rest of Phase 2, which will conclude in December of 2023. Other opportunities for getting involved in this process include joining our mailing list, reading your community's report, or identifying important assets using the Community Area Planning Workbook. If you have questions or would like to talk to a team member, we're at a library near you each month throughout this process. We encourage anyone interested in shaping the future of Charlotte to get involved in the community area planning process. The Charlotte Future 2040 Comprehensive Plan, Policy Map, and Area Plans work together to ensure future development benefits everyone and Charlotte becomes a more equitable city for all. Like all policies, these plans and map will be reviewed and updated at regular intervals of time. We encourage you to join the Charlotte Future email list so you receive notifications about future planning efforts as it is the best opportunity to influence growth and change in your city. Thank you for your attention with today's presentation and your interest in the growth and development of Charlotte.
The City of Charlotte is excited to introduce our city's first ever Unified Development Ordinance, or UDO. The workings of city government can sometimes seem complicated, making it hard to understand why our neighborhoods look the way they do. Understanding how new growth is incorporated can also be confusing at times. This new, simplified document combines 8 updated ordinances into one place. The UDO includes standards for zoning, stormwater, trees, streets, and infrastructure. It modernizes our development regulations into a user-friendly format. Graphics, tables, and common terminology help simplify the process. We encourage you to learn more details through the links below. We look forward to working together to consolidate Charlotte's development regulations into our city's first ever UDO.
As we talk about the Unified Development Ordinance, or the UDO, it's important to understand that the UDO was adopted after conversations with many community and staff stakeholders. Over 1,500 comments were collected from community members throughout the process. We had extensive conversations with City Council and Planning Commission, and the UDO Advisory Committee, or the OAC, reviewed and commented on the UDO throughout the adoption process. There were also over 600 comments collected from city staff and county partners. The UDO timeline began on October 7th, 2021, and the UDO was ultimately adopted in August of 2022. Throughout the process of going from a first draft to our final adopted draft, there were several rounds of community feedback. We released several drafts of the UDO throughout this process and worked with the public to refine the document based on that feedback. In 2023, we took the adopted UDO and introduced a series of text amendments to better clarify and adjust the standards to make sure that the UDO was understandable, that we were clear in what the standards were saying, and the document was ready for public use before the June 1st, 2023 effective date. 2 of the 3 amendments that we proposed were adopted by City Council on May 15th, 2023, and the UDO went into effect on June 1st. On June 1st, the UDO guided all conventional zoning that existed in Charlotte prior to the UDO to translate to a UDO zoning district. This article of the UDO in Article 3 was adopted by City Council and went into effect on June 1st. However, zoning districts that were zoned conditionally, or those zoning districts that were rezoned by City Council at some point with specific conditions or options, did not translate on June 1st, 2023. These sites will not stay this way forever. Staff will consider changes to these in the future to align with zoning. The important thing to remember is that any recommended alignment rezoning for properties will be based on the property's place type that is recommended by the Charlotte Future 2040 policy map. And so I wanted to show what we mean by aligning zoning districts with the place type. Each place type in the policy map has a set of zoning districts that were written based off of that policy guidance. For example, the neighborhood 1 place type aligns with the N1A district, the N1B zoning district, all the way through the N1F zoning district, which are contained in the UDO. Similarly, neighborhood 2, which is more for multifamily and apartment buildings, was written and guided the development of the N2A, N2B, and N2C zoning district standards in the UDO. It's important to understand the 3 actors that are involved in this interplay. The policy that is adopted in the Charlotte Future 2040 Comprehensive Plan has guidance for both the place types and the regulations. Policy 2.1 is a good example. In Policy 2.1, the comprehensive plan directs the development regulations to allow single-family, duplex, and triplex structures where single-family housing is allowed. It also directs the UDO to provide site development standards to guide things like lot sizes, setbacks, and building scale and parking, etc. The place types are going to be that map that is applied throughout the city, guiding where Neighborhood 1 zoning districts should be both now and in the future. The regulations contain the actual rules to achieve the vision established in the policy. N1A, N1B, N1C, and all the other N1 districts contain standards that allow single-family duplex and triplex structures in any of these districts. They also contain site development standards as guided by the comprehensive plan to control things like sidewall heights, front setbacks, rear setbacks, and other regulations that are going to ensure that the future development fits in with the context of our neighborhoods. The UDO also includes mixed-use and non-residential zoning districts that are different than our residential districts. Commercial zoning is in Article 6. Our institutional and office and also research campus districts are in Article 7. Article 8 contains manufacturing and logistics, or what we previously called industrial zoning. And then Article 9 includes a new zoning district to allow for innovation mixed use, which are those areas of our city that have an older industrial building stock but are transitioning into a more residential and active use area. And so those districts and those standards in Article 9 will allow for that form of housing or that form of development to be built. The UDO also contains centers districts, which allow for a mix of uses from residential to retail to commercial. And we have 3 different districts to achieve this. The neighborhood center district is more for neighborhood scale mixed use. Community activity center and regional activity centers achieve more intense urban forms of development. We also have our transit-oriented development districts, which are applied primarily around our transit stations on the Blue Line and planned Silver Line corridors. To help you understand what our typical zoning standards could include, we've listed them out here. It's important to know that each zoning district includes development standards and other requirements that are applicable to the specific zoning district. They are going to be different depending on the guidance contained in the policy map, depending on the zoning district. So in your neighborhood 1 districts, you'll see more requirements for a larger front setback to allow for a bigger yard for individuals to enjoy the context of a single-family neighborhood with a front yard and buildings further back from the street. In our more urban center districts, you're going to see those setbacks become much smaller and move the buildings up closer to the sidewalk to increase the walkability and the attractiveness of those areas for more urban forms of development. And that's just one example. You'll see also standards for landscaping and screening, parking, open space, building design and transparency, and several other things you'll see listed here. And so I'll end here. The benefits of a UDO, as you zoom out, are several. The first, it helps our city better manage storm events. So as we see increased climate changes and larger storm events, the standards in the UDO are going to accommodate and mitigate some of the impacts that come from these larger storm events. There are also standards in the UDO to preserve and protect our tree canopy, whether it's the heritage tree protection, which are trees larger than 30 inches, or increased tree save requirements. The UDO does several things to better preserve this treasure of our community. There are also standards in place to shift our focus from moving cars to more towards moving people. And so that could mean increasing pedestrian infrastructure like sidewalks. It also could mean requiring bike trails or bike paths, multi-use paths for moving people and not just cars. We also allow different forms of housing, like accessory dwelling units, which can often be built in backyards or within an existing residential structure, to allow our community to house more people within our existing building footprints and our existing housing stock. And then there's also standards that are included in the UDO to improve our open space, providing folks with space to enjoy nature and enjoy the public realm as we grow and develop as a city.